All right, everybody, I started my next book. It is another by Italo Calvino. He's the guy who wrote the 6 memos for the next millennium that I read, like the beginning of summer. And then somewhere in the middle, I read his other book called Invisible Cities. And now I've picked up If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. I'm already getting some smudges on its nice white and silver cover from my hands here. But I just sort of had my first thought about the book, and I was reading without any intention. I tried to clear my mind as good as I could from all external sources. I've had a few things kind of on my mind lately. The other day, I was kind of struck with some fear, and I sort of whittled it down to just the idea of things being sort of outside of my control and, being kind of placed in a situation where I have less freedoms just by space alone, even. Kind of losing some personal space and feeling like I'm losing a little bit of my expression, maybe a little bit of my character, even if that's the case. And this morning I kind of was having some ill feelings about just money and just a lot of the challenges that it's presented for me. And, I kind of scroll through TikTok haphazardly, and I make comments that occasionally are more for me, than anybody who else is on TikTok, right? But I was sort of just feeling like, what? Like without money, it's just like a struggle, but I sort of almost then identify with it at this point now. And it's like, it's almost like I can tell, when something comes from money, and it has this idea that, like popularity is really truth almost. Just, this idea of mass conversion. If almost I could be converted into another language, like I'm an exotic thing somewhere and everybody all of a sudden appreciates everything that I do. That kind of thought to me now is a little bit kind of frightening as well. Just some conversations that I've had with my therapist about the roles that I have, and I was like, yeah, what, I've kind of been able to come up with all these positions in my life just based on kind of hard work, and it's like through diligence and my ability to explain myself when I can. And it would almost feel like, like if I was to just come into money or something like that, then it would all just be fairy tale. It's like all the hard work was just for nothing if the money doesn't necessarily come from hard work, And then maybe that's where you have real value anyways, is just in the idea, I think, of you actually having space and being able to handle it. I think space is probably the most valuable thing that there is. If I had to say, what is real money, I think everybody just longs for space. They long for freedom. And I think that in a lot of ways, when you've earned that, kind of through your own pathway of not necessarily through popularity, then you kind of feel even more justified, right? Because you know that it's not just based off of other people's kind of sympathy or empathy or patronizing manners. It's something that is as close to real as you're going to get. And so I kind of had a little bit of a frustrating moment, just seeing other people take off and kind of me still being here and just having to continually sort of refire the forge to try and come up with some new element so that I can see the light reflect some way and then convince myself to say that, if I hadn't stayed, then this would have never been. And it just continually refines me and hardens me a little bit, which I think ultimately is, kind of something that I don't necessarily want to happen, is to become almost so hardened by the nature of reality that it's like anything that I see in which the disposition is sort of like life is all fancy. I don't want to be abrasive to that, to those things. And maybe it's something that I don't necessarily have to endure all the time or be a part of all the time, so I need to maintain my ability of being able to harmonize with a multitude of things, and even that side of things, where things seem unfair, where chance is at play, because I think chance is, where we can be tested the most. And if I believe in myself and if I believe in my hard work, then there's really only more opportunity there for that. And I need to be open and willing and have the ability to listen when I come across things that it seems like if this is happening, then I need to sort of throw out my constitution so that it doesn't kind of break me down, just sort of seeing things happen to other things that haven't happened to me, But after I kind of had dealt with all those things, right, and finally sort of had an interesting conversation with somebody who, just struck up very casually, as most conversations do, but you gotta get out, got to get out to have conversations. But just a very nice lady kind of was strolling by and was taking pictures of the stream, and I was like, oh, do you need me to get out of your picture? And then it just sort of opened up just from there, but for that to even happen, I had to kind of get out in the first place. So had a very interesting conversation with her, Peggy Silverwood, and who knows where any kind of relationship will go, or what it will become. But it was a very interesting conversation, and I sort of felt very comfortable with this individual, and was able to be myself, and express a few things, and did my best to leave all complications up for maybe wanderings about a person. Maybe we can come to know people in space, even, it seems, you know what I mean? When we actually think about maybe people the most, that's when maybe we can sort of come across, these phantasmas of individuals as memories themselves sort of play out all facets of perspectives, you know, regarding the things that are most set on our minds. And after kind of having that, I actually got to the point where I felt like, you know, I can start my new book. And starting a new book, there's always kind of a little bit of a challenge, a little bit of a hurdle, a little bit of, you know, that sort of learning curve, energy that you have to invest kind of thing is just a focus, you know, and then when you sort of commit to something, you're already kind of telling yourself that it's okay, that maybe there's other things that you're missing out on by sort of committing your focus to one thing. And so I think that there can be a slight amount of fear if fear itself was ever just a decision, you know, the idea that there's nothing in the world that can't hurt us, like we're always going to be hurt, you know, and so fear itself is just movement from a place, and there are certain things, you know, of varying levels and degrees which signify these emotions within our lives. And that motion, I think, is kind of, that type of motion is something I want to talk about after reading, what am I on, page 12 of this book here. But it was a significant thought, right? And it's like I'm reading a climax. And maybe there's times when that wouldn't necessarily seem like a positive or enjoyable thing to read, you know what I mean? Something that is like you're catching a thought the entire time. It's like when things come to a moment, when everything adds up, right? But it's like this is a continual expression of that notion, is sort of what the pages feel like to me. And that's sort of all I wanted to say. So yeah, it's just sort of like that moment where everything's kind of adding up, and I think it's like, I know I've sort of touched on that idea before, you know, coming to an idea. And I know I was saying like the end, it's like the truth. You know, can you handle the truth? One of those moments of, can you handle the truth? Can you handle that maybe life is getting away from you? And so maybe in a way, reading this book and how it feels is almost the same feeling as I gave off when I was describing how it was getting to the point where I could read this book. It's like watching paper burn. It just all sort of flares up. It's like everything's a flare. So maybe it can be a enjoyable experience to sort of sit by the fire and see how different things burn. But this is definitely, in my mind, just sort of reads like that almost. It's like watching a sheet of paper sort of burn is how the characters and the expressions sort of come across on the pages. The way that it moves, and it sort of is creating this golden nature, but the golden nature is only on the leading edge of where it's about to burn. and there's something, you know, dark kind of in the midst of the entire thing, and at its core almost, which perhaps maybe is the smoke, right? But I kind of had an interesting thought about smoke a while ago. I was like talking to my uncles about my grandpa, their dad, and I was like, I like describe my grandpa in the way I was like, he was like a rich smoke. Just smelled real. But there's some things that it seems like only smoke can reveal. And maybe it's like a classic nature of things. And so you know, as classic as everything can be, maybe that's like the hardest truth to accept. Is that everybody is just people, you know? This world that we have so much belief in. It's just these things that have so many problems. Like everybody worries. And just the intense nature of thinking of what it would be like to feel everybody's worry and how much anxiety that could give. Just the raw nature of everybody feeling unsure. And I sort of feel like the way this book expresses itself is like through this unsurety of this sort of anxiety, this like social anxiety kind of thing, where it's like everything's getting away. And what I was also thinking today too is maybe the best solution for things is just their exhaustion. Maybe everything has a place in its exhaustion, because then it becomes some element of our lives that once it's exhausted, it has sort of a value as a resource. If we feel then that we know what triggers something, then maybe even every feeling that we might have has this feeling that it's in our control. And then maybe the kind of opposite expression of anxiety is feeling like you're actually onto something, like the entire thing is a climax instead of anxiety. And I'm sure there's other things that you could sort of apply that logic to, you know, many things in life. And there you go, there's sort of a new thought for you. Italo Calvino, if on a winter's night a traveler.